Hey, it's Rachel with Journey Back Quilts. In this series, we're going to be making traditional quilt blocks. By the end of this series, you will have a finished throw quilt with 16 different traditional blocks in it. In this lesson, we're going to be making the Crazy House block. Let's get started.
All right, to make the Crazy House block, we're going to need lots of different fabrics. So I have 4 of these 3.5 inch by 5.5 inch in this blue color. Then I also have 4 3.5 by 5.5 inch in this pink color. With those, we're going to have 3.5 inch blocks, 4 of them, of a background fabric. And then I have 5 3.5 inch blocks of this dark fabric and 4 3.5 inch. So I've got 5 here and 4 here of a light pink fabric. And we are going to do the stitch and flip method, also called a snowball method, to make each of these blocks. So with these 4 fabrics, we're going to be making snowballed corners, or it's also called stitch and flip method, and they're going to be sewing from the left upper corner down to the right. So you can either mark all your fabrics if you want to, or if you're using a diagonal seam tape, we're just going to do the exact same thing we did in a previous lesson where we made different diagonal corners. I can't remember if we were doing flying geese or if we were doing snowballs. Let me look. Oh yeah, we were doing snowballs with the combination star block. So it's similar to that. We're just not doing it all 4 corners. We're just doing it in one. So we're going to sew from the upper left down to the corner on all 4 of these, or all 8 of these. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. So you're going to put these right sides together if your fabric has a right side to it. My white does not. And we're going to sew from the corner down to the point. Like I said, I'm going to flip out my foot for an open-toed foot so I can see what I'm doing better. And I like to start with my needle down so I can butt that corner right up to the needle and then line up the opposite corner with my diagonal seam tape here on the table. Can you see that? And then we're just going to follow that corner all the way down. All the way through, and then just sew right off of that corner, and then we can chain piece. So again, right sides together, matching up those raw edges really well, because that is what is going to replace the corner, and if they're not matching up, our corner is going to look really wonky. Again, just lift your foot, line up that corner with the needle and the opposite corner with the red line. And we have this diagonal seam tape in our shop if you're needing some. It is super helpful. You could also use a Seam So Easy guide that is from Lori Holt's line. We do have those in shop as well. We love both of those products. So just continue sewing all of these, chain piecing all of them, doing the exact same thing on all of them, going from right or upper left to the lower right, sewing on that diagonal, and then do the other color as well. And I'll see you back here as soon as you're done. Okay, now that I'm done chain piecing all of them, I'm going to clip apart the connecting threads and double check that all those corners are laying down nice. Sometimes the needle can be a little pesky and flip those little corners up, and if that's the case, we want them to lay down flat. So just looking at each of these corners, making sure they look good. I think I had an issue with this very first one. I did, and so I'm going to take my friend Jack the Ripper and rip out just a portion of that seam just to get it to lay flat again. And if you just stick the pointy part of the seam ripper in some of your stitches, you can unzip them usually. Sometimes they're a little pesky right there. Okay, that's better. So to fix it, I'm going to flip it around the other way so it doesn't happen again. Pull out any knots that happened, and we're just going to start right there in the center, lining it up with the red center line of my diagonal seam tape, and re-sew it down. All right, that looks better. I do like to set my seams, which is just ironing everything flat, because you can see how kind of it's wavy, and when you press it, it's going to lay flat again. So when we go to trim it, everything's going to come out looking nice. So let's go set those seams, and it's just a really quick press. Just press them all flat again. I just kind of stack them all on top of each other. I like to do this quickly, so I'm going to stack a few of them together, actually all 4 of the same color going the same direction, and make sure you have a good rotary blade. If it's been a while since you've changed it and you've done a lot of cutting lately, it's time to change it. And we're putting the 1/4 inch line of our ruler on the seam line, so we're cutting this a 1/4 inch away. Give it good firm pressure all the way through, and there we go. And then we're going to iron these in a minute, but let's do the other side. So again, I'm going to stack these all going the same direction, making sure they're all lined up nice. 1/4 inch of the ruler on our seam. Nice firm pressure all the way through. There we go. Okay, now we need to iron these. I want to experiment a little bit and see which way I want to put these. A lot of times with snowballed corners, we just press that towards that corner, but you're going to see that seam, and a lot of times I like to hide the seam. But we also want to make sure that everything is lining up and it's looking nice. So there's a couple things. One, when you just press it over to one side or the other, there's more fabric, which creates just a tiny bit of a bump, which can shorten the edges of your fabric. So if that's happening, we might need to open our seam on the back all the way, and that will help our block lay nice and flat. So like I said, I want to experiment a little bit. So I'm going to put the white part down on my ironing board, and I'm going to press the seam towards the colored side of the fabric. And let's just see how that looks and how it's measuring. We do want it to measure that 3.5 by 5.5 inches. Okay, I'm going to let my clapper rest that seam for a second. Okay, now let's double check that it's still measuring that 3.5 by 5.5 inches and everything's looking square. It is. It worked out perfectly. So using the clapper probably helped to get this to lay a lot flatter. But if you're finding that yours is not measuring out correctly, first of all, make sure that when you sew it, that you have your white fabric matching up to your raw edges perfectly, that your seam allowance is perfectly diagonal, and then your ironing is working out. If it's not, try opening the seam and see if that will help lay everything out flatter again. So I'm going to go through and iron all of these going towards the colored side of my fabric and get them all ready to go, and I'll see you back here in just a minute. All right, now that we're done ironing all of those, I noticed a problem. So these are going to go together like so. So I had to go double check my dimensions, and I was wrong. They're not 3.5. They're supposed to be 3 inches. So we're going to cut these down, and I'm so sorry that you're wasting a little tiny bit of fabric, but we're going to cut these down on this side, not this side of our block. I don't think it's really going to matter. Either way, it would be the top. So I'm going to line up my ruler with 3.5 inches here, and I'm just going to cut that 1/2 inch of fabric off. Again, I apologize so much. My dimensions were off. I was cutting these late last night, and I made a mistake. But if you trim them down to 3 inches, they are going to come out perfectly. And I would rather have a little bit of wiggle room with my dimensions than not enough. So this still works out just fine. So I'm lining them up with 3 inches, and they're still 5.5 inches long. And we're just going to trim that little bit off. So they still look like this. They're just a little narrower now to 3 inches. They're going to finish at 2.5 inches. And when we sew them together, our block will be measuring 5.5 inches unfinished. Okay. I hate when that happens, but hey, it happens to all of us, as you can see. So there's ways around it. Just trim them off. The other thing I was going to mention was all of those corners that we just cut off of these would make awesome tiny little half square triangles. So make sure you save those. Go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch down and just have them ready to go. And that way you'll have a pile of half square triangles anytime you need them for a block, or you can make a scrappy quilt out of half square triangles. I've been saving mine for a little while and I've got a lot of half square triangles building up. All right, there we go. Okay. Next step is we're going to be making a block that looks just like this. I had to practice it out just to make sure it was going to work, and it works out just great. Isn't that so cool? So the only thing you're going to do is take one of your blue, one of your pink, rotate it the other direction, and you do have a little bit of space in between here, but once you sew that down with your 1/4 inch, it shrinks so that it makes this perfectly straight line. Isn't that awesome? So we're going to make 4 of these total. So let's take these to the sewing machine. And they're all going the same direction. So I've got all of my blues on the bottom and the pink on the top with the whites opposite of each other. I'm going to switch out my foot for a 1/4 inch foot. Just make this process go a little easier. All right, here we go. All right, clip apart those connecting threads, and let's go ahead and open the seam for this block. Oh, those look so great. All right, let's just double check that they are measuring that 5.5 by 5.5 inch squares. So 2 3/4 is our center line. And yes, it is looking great. I love it. Okay, to get a visual for how this block is going to look, let's go ahead and lay it out. So these blocks are our corner blocks, and we've got one that's going up and one that's going sideways. Just bringing up my picture here so I can see. So this one's going to go sideways, and then this one is going down. So the blue is always on the outside, and this one's going sideways this way. Isn't that cool? Kind of a pinwheel effect again. And then we've got our dark color, or whatever color you want to use is totally fine. It's going to be the center and the very outside block. And we want to make sure these are measuring 3 inches, because I think I lied and I told you 3.5. These should be 3 inches square. And then our light color is going to go in between here to give that a little bit of a pop. You could use whatever color you want to. It would, I mean, there's so many different color variations for this. It would be so cool. So that is how our block is supposed to be looking by the time we are done with it. So next we have to sew these into 2 patches. I'm going to double check real quick that they are measuring 3 inches square and not 3.5, just to make sure. I think they are 3.5. Oops, I'm so sorry about that. 3 inches square. So I'll have the correct dimensions in the description box below, and I will make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be. So don't cut when it's too late at night. Okay, now I have them all trimmed up. So I'm going to take 4 of my dark with the 4 light colored and just sew those together in a pair. Let's go sewing machine. Make sure those are going right sides together. Okay, clip apart those connecting threads and let's go iron them. So we opened the seams on our last block. I'm going to open the seam again on these blocks, and we're just going to have to be careful that our seams line up because they won't be nesting. This will be a good test to try this technique out. A lot of patterns have you open all of your seams so that all the blocks are laying nice and flat. So this will give you some practice on that. And practice on opening all those seams. So these sets should be measuring 4 or 5.5 as well by 3 inches. And then they're going to be going with the pinks going towards the center and the darks on the outside. Just like so. That looks so cool. What a fun, crazy block. Okay, now we're going to sew them into rows of 3, just like a 9 patch. So we want these seams to match up. That's what we have to focus on, okay? Then we're going to sew this row together. These they don't need to match, so no problems there. But when we sew this entire row to this, we're going to want this to match up and this to match up. Also, we're going to need to match this up really well. So let's go ahead and sew these into rows of 3. So I'm starting with the top right and middle, and I'm going to put those right sides together, and then I'm going to line up those seams, and I can kind of peel this back so I can see where it's lined up, and I can see that these are running straight with each other so that when it lays back down on top of it, they are going to be straight on top of each other. You can also see when you look at it this way that the flaps are right matching up to each other. All right, let's sew that down. Okay, and then the center is just getting the center dark matched up with the light. And then the far right to the center, there's nothing to nest here, but we do want to make sure everything is lining up, raw edges together. Okay, clip apart those connecting threads, lay them back out, and add the 3rd block to our row. So this is our top row. It's looking really good. I'm going to add the other way. And remember, it's going this way, not this way. Okay. So nothing to match up here other than our raw edges. Center row is pretty easy. We're just going to add that other 2 patch to the end. Okay, and then our next row, we do need to match up those seams. So this one is going this way. So we're going to match up those seams there. And thinking about this, I probably should have switched my pink and my blue so that the pink was on the outside and then they wouldn't have been nested. I wonder what the colors would have looked like for that. But I really like this too. So there's endless designs with this quilt block. So fun. All right, I want to see how all those are matching up now. Clip apart those connecting threads. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Oh, yeah, we're looking really good. And how is this one? Yep, really good. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take these to the ironing board real quick. And since we've been opening all of our seams, we're just going to continue with that pattern on this quilt block. So go ahead and open all those seams. You know what? I'm changing my mind. I want to nest these middle seams. So I'm going to iron that seam towards the center block. You can still open if you'd like to, but I really want to nest those seams so I can get that perfect center point. That's kind of where your eyeball goes, is right in the middle. So I want to make sure that those are nice and solid there. And it's not wanting to go because I already opened that seam. Stay down, little guy. Okay. All right, so I ironed everything in on that center row. So I want to iron these going out. All right, and so we can remember that the outside is the dark color. And this is how it's going to go. And now we can nest these seams, and we'll just worry about matching up these seams as we get to them. Make sure those are lined up. Okay, let's go back to the sewing machine. I'm going to line up those straight lines first. Straight seams that we opened. Give that another try. And then nest this seam. That's looking much better. And then nest this seam. Still a little puckery. Let's see if we can flatten it out a little bit. All right. Sew down the rest and let's see what it looks like. That's much better. Much, much better. All right, let's go open that seam. So again, I'm going to iron it from the top, and I'm going to iron vertically, horizontally. I know I did that opposite. Horizontally, vertically, diagonally. There we go. Okay, let's see if this is squaring up correctly. It's looking good just to my naked eye, but let's see how it's turning out. So it's quite a bit larger than 12.5 inches. Okay then, so what I'm going to do is line up the diagonal with the diagonal, and 5 inches is hitting this line right here. and 7.5 is right here, and that makes our 6.25, which is our center, perfectly. And we're going to square up every side here, which is totally fine because our diagonal will still be intact if our corners are matching up those corners. So our block was just a touch big than we wanted it to be. Just accidentally shifted it. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to do this side carefully first, and then the top. And then I'm going to rotate it. And this is the point where I wish I had a rotating mat under me, but that's okay. We can line it right back up to 12.5 inches on these two edges. And 5 should still be here, 7.5 should still be here. Same with right here. So that 6.25 is sitting right there in the center. And I'm going to square up this side and this side. All right, and there we go. Do you understand why it's called Crazy House Block now? I think I do. It's not just because it looks crazy, it's because it was a little crazy putting it together. I hope you enjoyed this though. Great job.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me today and making this crazy house block. I hope you enjoyed this and you're going to go make one for yourself. We would love to see all these blocks that you're making. There's a free Facebook group with a link in the description box, and you can go there, post all the pictures you've been making of all these quilt blocks and anything else that you've been creating. We would love to see it. If you'd like more help in your quilting journey, I invite you to join our society. It's a membership where you'll get a library full of quilting tutorials, different classes, discounts on products and services, access to me, and so much more. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week where we're going to make the rail fence block. I'll see you then.